Georg is assistant researcher at the Department for Architecture Theory, and he's going to moderate and give a short introduction.
So good morning, also from my side, and welcome to the third and last day of this year's conference. The panel I'm going to be moderating is called Furnishings and Finishings with Imagination. The panel consists of 3 lectures, the first entitled Darwin and the Devil's Shudders on Desire and What is Willed in Language, to be held by Amanda Holmes. The second, Speculative Resources by Iris van der Thuin. And the third by Vera Bühlmann with the title Meteora Alloys, Sealess Ideations and Their Architectonic Spaces of Extension. So let's begin today's session. After the fashion of the time, Belle Epoque, there's no bric-a-brac, true. But the chamber isn't what you would call monastic. There's a pretty rug on the floor, the tightly drawn bedspread is blue satin, the room is dark, a single green shaded lamp provides the only source of light, and presumably the Chinese painted folding screen could have provided still more privacy and dark. The narrow bed had belonged since childhood. The cork on the walls was intended not just to soundproof, but to prevent pollen and dust from aggravating allergies and asthma. The result was somewhat tomb-like. Where are we when we are thinking? Speaking about Marcel Proust's bedchamber, also serving as his writing room, his housekeeper Céleste Albaret noted that she had never seen him write even the shortest note standing up. He wrote, according to his biographer Diana Fass, from a semi-recumbent position, suspended midway between the realms of sleeping and waking, using the knees as a desk. Thinking with Michel Serres, Proust was mixing with the world, which was mixing with him. And yes, it were the feet that were writing. Just as Monsieur Swann, Proust's character in Search of Lost Time, we can imagine him eating a madeleine, stumbling over blocks and other things, which he wrote are pointing to somewhere outside the realm, beyond the reach of intellect, while sitting with half-opened and half-closed eyes, outside and inside at once, in the middle of his bed, in the corner of his room. Wonderment is the first passion of all, if we follow René Descartes, and there is no desire more natural than the desire for knowledge if we listen to Michel de Montaigne. Accompanying Marcel Proust, Michel de Montaigne also revealed, I have ever loved to repose myself, whether sitting or laying, with my heels as high or higher than my head. And his mixed text, the essays we learn from Serres, also walks. He writes, it goes with La Belle Noiseuse, a chaos of forms and use, a superabundance and the luxury of circumstances, but it goes with absence, blankness, water that ripples upon which one does not write. Montaigne is blank, aqueous and translucent. Michel is all the others, the individuals, the ancients, his friends, his other, and Michel is nobody. This self-depicted is the sum of the others and of nothing. Blaise Pascal wrote, it is not Montaigne, but in myself that I find everything I see there, and Stefan Zweig found in him a you in which my eye is reflected. If to learn something also means to become someone else, we can experience in the writing of Montaigne how to generously enjoy the freedom to embody differences. Even though, or exactly because he himself said that he never studied anything for the sake of learning. I quote again Montaigne. I am not portraying being, but becoming, not the passage from one age to another, but from day to day, from minute to minute. François Lyotard called this Montaigne's freely and equally floating attention on what Montaigne himself called the unequal, irregular, and multiform movement of life. Marshall McLuhan suggested that the Baroque painters did exactly as Montaigne in shifting attention to the peripheries of vision. And if we look at the time around 1600, a work of art was indeed expected above all to evoke wonderment, the first passion of all, as we heard from Descartes, taking the soul by surprise, which causes it to consider attentively the objects that it finds rare and extraordinary. Such a secret allows us, following Serres, to understand that inventing or discovering require the same effort for a similar result, since everything that exists, contingent, has a given quantity of rarity, that is to say, something new. Horror and the terrifying, love, motion and action, liveliness, suffering and compassion, vision, jest, joke, hoax, all notions of interest to Caravaggio and Bernini, as well as for what Walter Benjamin named the worldly wisdom of Montaigne. The question Sarah Bakewell identified as the one question that can be said fascinated him, as well as many of his contemporaries, sounds, however, quite simple. How to live? Which is not to be mistaken as the moral question, how should one live? No, how to live. An ingenious question and one that could be considered childish, following Le Corbusier. And yet in a conversation on science, culture and time with Bruno Latour, Michel Serres emphasized its power when he said that for him there is as much reason in Montaigne as there is in physics or biochemistry, and reciprocally that often there is as much unreason scattered through the sciences as there is in certain dreams. Reason is statistically distributed everywhere. No one can claim exclusive rights to it. This division thus is echoed in the image, in the imaginary picture that one makes of time. Instead, condemning or excluding one coincides a certain thing to antiquity, to archaism. One no longer says false, but rather out of date or obsolete. And he concludes, in earlier times people dreamed, now we think. For Montaigne, quoting there by Cicero, to live is to think, and we can add again Serres, to think is to invent. Speaking about his own mind, Montaigne said, it has its own power of rousing its faculties. Nature has given to it all, as to all other minds, enough material of its own for its use, and enough subjects for its imagination and judgment. And he, in his words, also emphasized its power of affection and even warned that a strong imagination brings on the event, say the scholars. Everyone feels its impact, but some are even knocked over by it. Occupying himself, speaking and listening, writing his essays and reading, he noted, I turn the pages now of one book, now of another, without order and without plan, reading by snatches. Sometimes I reflect, and sometimes I compose and dictate my reflections, walking up and down as at present. Aiming, in his words, for a well-formed, one can say mobile, over a well-filled and immobile intellect, however underlying the need for both. In a recent interview, Michel Serres brought up that with writing and printing, memory has become externalized and objectified. IT has continued this movement. Now, next to the memory, another faculty is transformed, the imagination, that is to say, the capacity to form images. And he raises the question, do we lose the ability to imagine with all the images to which we have access on the network, or do we discover another relationship to the image? Well, the answer is up for us to discuss. However, the way he put it, the question, reminds us of Montaigne's essays as la belle noiseuse, as a chaos of forms and use, a superabundance and the luxury of circumstances, and it goes with blankness. And we can further connect it to Gilbert Simondon's perspective, where we can see imagination not only as a faculty for inventing or creating images beyond the bounds of sensation, but also as a capacity for perceiving in objects qualities that are neither practical qualities, that are neither directly sensory nor wholly geometric, qualities that have neither to do with pure matter nor pure form. And an intérieur, from Latin inter, among, between, betwixt, in the midst of, can thought to be just such a place, full and with blankness. In the introduction to Serres' book on Hermès, Harari and Bell speak about invention as an inventory, in other words, a multiplicity of phenomena and types of knowledge. For them as well as for Simondon, the inventor does not proceed ex nihilo, out of nothing, and so didn't do Montaigne. As he in his time, we are up today to ask ourselves how to live. Imagine today, 400 years after Montaigne, our ways of living with oneself and with each other, ingeniously and childish. Learn to see how every room can connect to the whole world and how in turn every room can bring the whole world with it. And be reminded, as Marcel Proust pointed it out, for without the help of custom, it, the mind, would never contrive by its own efforts to make any room seem habitable. Furnishings and finishings with imagination. Our first speaker in this panel is Amanda Holmes. Her paper called Darwin and the Devil's Shudders on Desire and What is Willed in Language. Amanda Holmes is a doctoral candidate in the philosophy department at Villanova University. Her work is situated at the intersection of ontology and psychoanalysis. She is currently living in Vienna and writing her dissertation, which is titled Erotology, Desire and Being in Lacan's Return to Freud. We're very much happy to have you here.